very welcome to visit that and see what materials are available to you. And of course, there is training and consulting that provides, and there is a discount for people who have been carefully reading the emails that we have been sending out for the past week or so. Right. So for those who don't know me, because I know that some people are kind of from your side, Clark, my name is Sergey. My second name is unpronounceable. I'm the CEO and founder of BranchTrack.com. BranchTrack is this cute online tool for creating sims where you can just essentially type whatever you want to happen and then connect a few dots between different scenes and build your own branching path, and that it automatically turns into a playable conversation or a situation where you can pick your own characters, backgrounds, and it all styles itself. So there is no technical or design skills involved in that. And the trial is fully functional and totally free. So if you BranchTrack.com at any point, please do so. We'd be happy to hear what you think of it. Right. So I will kick us off with a few questions, and I think the question number one, and it's actually what I'm really curious to find out, since we've solved the technical side, I think, of writing scenarios. My question is, why is writing sims so hard? The floor is yours, Clark.
Great, thank you. And again, please be interactive and other people can chime in. So I'm happy to answer questions. Obviously, that's what I'm here for. But please, other people chime in as well to make this a meet rather than a presentation would be just awesome. And one more thing before starting, if it wasn't for BranchTrack, I don't think short sims would be around as I know it. So BranchTrack's the ease of BranchTrack, exactly how easy it was to use BranchTrack and how powerful, made the sim process more WYSIWYG, more like as easy as writing a document. We're all really good at writing documents in part because our tools are so good. I am just old enough to remember writing before word processors, and it was a different beast. And I think BranchTrack has sort of created the word processor for sim design, which is why it's also so powerful. So thank you very much, Sergey. So why is it so hard? It's a ton of reasons. I think it's a lot harder than it looks. Again, not unlike writing. Writing is harder than it looks. We just have decades of experience behind it. Part of the hard thing about it is that one reason is we have terrible experts. A lot of people who are out there giving advice on interactive content really are giving wrong advice or are really giving terrible advice. So before listening to anyone, I'd sort of say, take a look at what they're doing and play a few of their experiences, and then sort of decide if you want to take their advice or not. But there are a lot of traps, and I think one of the goals of the short sim workshop is to help people get around the traps. One big trap on short sim design is being too wordy. People have this urge to almost think of be your own, choose your own adventure book model of saying we're just going to play down these long text routes, and text is awful. Too much text is awful. So most people screw up by just having 5 times more text than they should have. The last step in any short sim design is to get rid of like half the text if you can, or 2/3 more if you can. Computer games are also pretty bad models. So we all, I certainly play computer games a lot. I played it before hopping on this call. But they're really not good models for this kind of content. They're too rich. They're too tense. They're too complicated. I think even stories are bad models. We think a lot in terms of, let's write a great story. And I think we should think more in terms of processes. What is the process? So, if you want to be a good leader and you want to learn a little skill, you want a skill around leadership, say delegating authority, the story is the least important part of it. What you want to come up with is a really great, simple example of delegating authority, for example, or a simple example of soldering a circuit board, or a simple example of leading a project in allocating resources or whatever. You want to focus on really simple examples. Then you can make them a lot more interesting. Almost one of the most predictable failures that people start off in ASIM design is making it is thinking about it too complicatedly. So, when we sort of plan our sim, when we plan our first sim, especially, the first sim is the hardest one, and a lot of people fail on the first sim and then get discouraged and sort of walk away, which is the whole point of the workshop, is to get past that problem. So again, thinking in terms of a very, very simple simulation. Once you start building it, the first half of the workshop is actually begging people to focus on very simple things. The second half is then saying, now we can get complicated. Things get complicated on their own. The military has a phrase of, make our plans simple, because real life is real life makes them complicated. So let's start off with a very simple plan. So we start off with very simple simulations, and then by the end of it, no matter how simple you think it is, by the end of it gets complicated as you add details and you add emotions and you add props and you add graphics and you add, by the time you're done, I promise you it'll be complicated, but you really have to start the process very simply. Another common mistake, sorry, just one more, is that people do parallel narratives and saying, let's have 3 or 4 stories sort of going on. And, isn't it great because you can choose your own adventure, you can choose different paths. And so you end up going down very different, and we as arrogant, egotistical simulation designers want to create very complicated experiences where people have different endings, for example. And it turns out people hate that. People hate that in learning environments. They want to make mistakes. They want to do things, but by the end of the process, they don't want to have, they want to know what it is. I think it drives people crazy saying, I played the simulation and other people got different experiences out of it, because then they have to replay it and they repeat themselves. So I think sort of the false notion that we need to create parallel paths is another sort of common mistake in some simulation design.
Right. So that's actually great, because you're listing. My next question was like, what are the top 3 mistakes? But essentially, we came from why is it so hard to write scenarios to actual mistakes, and that's what they're too long, they're too complex, and the first one will be hard anyway, right? So this is why your workshop actually exists, and again, anyone is free to use the discount that we're offering. My other question is actually, even before you get to your first scenario, and also good news, no one has left during the last 3 minutes, so we didn't scare too many people off, or probably no one.
Despite my obvious flaws in public speaking.
Right.
Yes.
So I'd like to choose this question. So how do you sell the idea of using sims to a subject matter expert or a client? This is something that our BranchTrack clients ask a lot. They're saying like, yeah, I like what I could do potentially with BranchTrack, but do you have like a library of well-documented research so that my boss approves the $900 budget or something? So how do you sell the idea to someone who's not an instructional designer?
I think the big idea is that we're focusing on skills, not facts. I mean, I think most people, if they're honest, say that old stuff really didn't work very well. That old workbook stuff didn't work very well, and no one really liked it. And so I think there's sort of an honesty there. And so the notion of, hey, let's create something around teaching someone a skill. Here's how to be, here's how to do, again, delegating authority. Here's how to do filling out this form. So I think that the really compelling message right now is let's focus on skills, not on facts. Most of our old stuff was data dumping. We presented 100 facts in order and said, there, we've taught someone stuff. It doesn't stick. It doesn't work. So I think the biggest compelling thing is the focus. It's a skill focus. The other part, there's a bunch of different parts to it as well. One part of it is I'm not asking people to bet the farm. I mean, I'm not asking people to spend a year on some giant torturous program and then really hope it works. The whole notion of a short sim is something that you can do in, say, 40 hours. Once you're good at it, you can build an end-to-end short sim in 40 hours, and it might take you longer the first time. But it's this is not super complicated stuff, and I think we get in trouble when we overcomplicate it. And so, to some degree, the right answer is, hey, let's try it. Let's build our first sim, and then let's see how it goes, and we'll probably get it mostly right, and then we'll modify it beyond then. The other thing that I have found useful in my own little business model is also selling some off the shelf short sims as well. And so some cases we can say let's implement a handful of off the shelf short sims, in this case, say on leadership, and then let's because the bigger problem. So there's a sponsor who's someone you have to get on board, who walks in the door and says, hey, great, let's, I want to be effective. It's not a very good answer to tell that person, hey, I've never done a short sim before, but trust me, they're great. So to some degree, you may have to build 1 or 2 or 3 short sims yourself to get a bit of credibility, and then having that and then being able to show them. And by the I've worked with some communities now for 5 years, and by year 2, it starts building on itself. People come in and say, oh, what I want is that cool stuff that you do. I don't want the workbook stuff with all those bullets. I want the cool interactive stuff. And so, to some degree, you do have to prime the pump a little bit. You probably don't have to convince subject matter experts, because that's almost a losing game, trying to convince a subject matter expert what a short sim is. You want information from them. You don't necessarily want them to have to buy into it.
It actually reminds me of a client that we have. They were very honest and upfront about it when they bought their first license of BranchTrack. They said that we're just buying BranchTrack because it's simple, basic even, and we don't want to invest a lot of money. It's cheap, so we'll build a few of those. They didn't call them short sims. They said
no, of course,
small. Well, they should, but we'll build a few those smaller projects to test the waters, to get the buy-in from the management, and then we have all those plans to switch to a really big complex system. We already know the vendor, but we really want to kind of pave this path to it. And this, I think it's 4 years. So 4 years later, they still haven't bought the big system. They're still using BranchTrack, and I think they're happy with the shorter approach. They'd rather build things faster than spend 6 or 9 months on conceiving a project and then put people through hours of simulation, because I don't think it works in today's world. Especially they're training more of leadership people, and those people never have that time.
Totally agree. We think we need a lot more complicated technology than we do. And frankly, we think we're better than we are. We're not very good at this. So we don't want to have a million options. We kind of want to focus and get stuff out the door. Zoe asked a question: do you find it helpful to include educational data like experiential learning theory, or is that overkill? I mean, most conversations are a sponsor knocks on our door virtually these days and says, hey, we need a program to do these 5 things. And most of the time, they're pretty happy to if you say, okay, I have the answer. The answer is going to be these simulations, maybe a little bit of traditional content mixed in. And most times they say, yeah. I mean, frankly, most of the time, when in today's environment, in traditional training and development models, the person knocks on the door and says, hey, I need training. And the typical answer of a training person is, no, you don't really want that. You want these 10 other things that are super complicated. By the way, it's going to take 5 times longer than you think, and it's going to be 5 times more expensive than you think. But, and so most training people, frankly, push back on most inquiries and make them much more complicated and expensive and time consuming. So, and honestly, short sims are a relief to the person who's knocking the door, saying, we can do this thing, we can do it simply and effectively and visually, and in a way that people are going to like and actually changes people's behavior. So it's actually a surprisingly compelling case, as long as you don't over intellectualize it.
Right. So my another question is about the design process. So typically, we all know what ADDIE is, right? So we analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate, and then it goes in circles, right? Like that. Are there any additional steps that you have to keep in mind when you're designing scenarios, or maybe you have to skip a couple of steps so that they work?
I think traditional pedagogy stinks. It's too long, it's too consuming, and it doesn't get to what we're doing. And I think ADDIE sucks. Okay, I'll say it right now. I think it's a dreadful process. It's slow. The thing is, it produces junk. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to look at the content. I mean, you have all of these people saying, hey, I have this great theory for learning, and I have this great model of education, and I have this great ADDIE process. And you say, wow, that sounds great and rigorous and super time consuming and expensive. Wow, that must produce really great content, right? And then they show you what they produce and you go, seriously? That's what, don't be impressed with anyone's theory. Don't be impressed with anyone's credential. Look at their content, what they're producing. And most of the time, despite all these really elaborate, complicated, expensive processes, what they're producing is junk. So, ADDIE produces junk. It produces incredibly expensive, time-consuming, rigorous junk. And so the short sim process, by definition, again, let's produce 8 or 9 minute experience in about, in 40 hours. Okay, let's hold ourselves accountable to that. Let's time window it, whatever strategy, however you want to call it. If you do that, you have to have a very focused conversation with your subject matter expert. You need to get very action-focused content. You need to build this thing very, very carefully, not to go down a time suck of, because again, the other problem with most people who probably build off BranchTrack natively get lost in it, sort of, end up wanting to do everything and then get frustrated and end up accomplishing nothing. So you have to be very, very focused. So no, I think the ADDIE process is terrible. I think how a lot of people are taught is way expensive. And again, once again, don't listen to me. Who cares what I have to say? Look at their end product. Look at their end product, and don't let them BS you with how great their process is. Look at their end product. One quick question that came up on the thread that I just worth saying is, what's the difference in creating the sims in BranchTrack versus creating similar scenarios in Articulate Storyline? I can almost guarantee that anyone who builds simulations in Storyline will stop it and give up in frustration. If a client forces me to use Storyline, and sometimes they will, it'll take me 5 times longer to do it, and the experience will be half as good. It's almost like trying to write a novel on software that's designed for page layout. Some of the early page layout software. It is so cumbersome. It is so frustrating. You lose the elegance. You lose the flow. So even me, I'm incredibly experienced. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of short sims under my belt. You cannot believe how many sims I built. Going on Articulate Storyline gives me nightmares. I hate it so much because I lose my ability to have a flow in the design process. So, and the worst thing for a student is to try to learn good simulation design on Storyline. It's just, you will fail. So again, save yourself the trouble.
Yeah, well, let me just chime in defense of Storyline. I think Articulate Storyline is a great tool. It's very mature, so it's a little bit in the heavyweight category right now. There's Articulate Rise for those people who want a simpler interface on both the creation and the consumption end. But this is exactly the story how BranchTrack came to life 10 years ago, 9 years ago. I just got frustrated with the fact with 2 things. First of all, you have to create a lot of slides. They have to be connected to one another, and no tools. Okay, that was before Storyline came around. No tools could really show me that branching layout. And even with Storyline, it's kind of hard, especially if branching is more or less complex. But that's just half of the story, right? You can find better interface you want to. The other part is that this incredibly tedious cycle of you keep something in a script, and then you create the slides, and then you publish it, and you put it up for review, and then people review it and give you comments, and then you go in circles and around that. With BranchTrack, it's way simpler. You type something, it's already on screen. If it's a simulation that's already published, it's actually on screen for the people who are launching this scenario right now, right? So we always aimed for this kind of at your fingertips feeling about not the tedious feeling of publishing and reviewing and so on. At one point, we even didn't want to support SCORM, but then the industry sort of forced us into it. But but again, you have to try it for yourself. But I still want to say that out of the tools on the market right now, Articulate Storyline is one of the best for creating classic traditional media rich learning. But if you want to design something that contains 100 different scenes which all look kind of the same, because the only difference is the story that you're telling and what the characters are saying, you'll just tire yourself out, and it's just too complex to be finished typically.
There's a linear bias towards, again, most of us are, there's a linear bias towards Storyline. If you're learning in the environment of Storyline, you're going to end up creating very linear content, lots of bullets, lots of sequential content, and it just, so the biases of the thing. One of the reasons to Sergey, your earliest question, is sort of why is simulation design so hard right now? It's not going to be 5 years from now. So this is something that we're in this bubble right now where we are transitioning from linear content to experiential content, from facts to skills. And so we're all pioneers here. But the good news is it's not like it's that hard. We now have the roadmap to do it. But the creating experiences, which you can do in BranchTrack, more than creating data dumps, which is what you do in Storyline. And by the way, we're talking about this in the chat room. You can embed very easily BranchTrack into Storyline. I do it all the time. Half of my client deliverables are some kind of storyline wrapper with a bit of storyline content, where the heart of the experience is a simulation in BranchTrack. So incredibly easy to do.
Yes, it's a typical use case for storyline lector, Captivate, pretty much any tool that allows embedding any third-party content. So you can either create your like typical course, explain, I don't know, the basics of employee management, right? And then you say, okay, well, here's actual scenario where you have to manage an employee who will not be happy about this and so on. Or, a course on sales skills, right? Or customer service. And then instead of a quiz or building something complex using those slides, you just plug in BranchTrack scenario on one of the slides and you use the tool that is best for its task combined. And you can even send data from BranchTrack into Storyline so that you can do stuff in Storyline based on the number of points that someone got within that scenario. So you can like lock navigation or branch them to a different chapter or do whatever if you're up for it. And so yeah, like one of the things that I don't like about Articulate products is that they are a little bit like closed loop, in terms of like being open to third-party developers and so on. It's a little bit like Apple approach. But us, on the other hand, we always try to be very open and like very hackable, almost in a good sense, so that we play nicely with other developers. Also, because we're small. Right. So speaking of like myth busting. Okay. So in your opinion, are learning styles a thing? This. Listening versus vision and so on, and can Sims cater for different learning styles?
If you want to get disillusioned with the learning community, all you have to do is listen to 3 people talking about learning styles, and then you walk away saying there is no hope. Both people who are in favor of learning styles and people who are against learning styles are wrong, and they're stupid for arguing it. It's just a pointless conversation. There is a learning to do. If you are learning how to ride a bicycle, you are going to do it by doing it. It's not a matter of learning styles or not. If you want to learn how to speed read, you're probably going to be speed reading. If you want to learn, it depends on what you're learning and why. If you want to learn about a timeline of the American Revolution, you may want to look at that at a sheet of paper and say, okay, this came before this came before this, or whatever. So it's not a matter of, learning styles is a stupid conversation. There's absolutely nowhere it can go or should go that's of any use. We need to think instead about how do we teach people to do things. We're really, really good at teaching people how to know things. We're good at wrapping stories and graphics around, what are the 5 different types of leaders? Okay, what are the 5? Okay, it also doesn't matter. Knowing the 5 types of leaders can help you be a better leader, but it's kind of fun. It's like white bread. It's like, you eat it, if you feel full for 5 seconds, it's good. So this sort of, as opposed to, I want to be a leader. And so we can say, well, now, how do you want to learn how to be a leader? Do you want to learn how to be a leader by reading a case study of some famous leader? Probably not. Do you want to learn how to be a leader by learning the 18 different kinds of leadership styles? No. You want to be a leader by being put in situations where you can practice leadership a little bit? Yeah, that's what I want. And so, if we're going to teach you how to be a leader around, again, delegating authority, or using the fact that you're a role model if you're a leader, in terms of, so how do you use that to your advantage? How do you use the fact that when you're a leader, people watch you and obsess about you and follow your footsteps? So you want to teach that through micro experiences, not through data dump. So the whole learning style almost is manipulative to try to, there is a cult of traditional instructional designers, in my opinion. There is this philosophy of traditional instructional designers who I kind of think they know that their product stinks. They know that no one likes what they're doing, but they kind of circle the wagons and sort of try to convince themselves and each other how wonderful it is. And I almost think both, I think the learning style argument is a real condemnation of that community. So if you want to teach leadership, the way I want to learn leadership is by being put in a bunch of micro situations, little mini learning experiences where I get to, experience the kind of typical learning leadership problem, try different techniques, some will work, some won't, and then sort of understand why what works does, and then understand why what works does work and why what doesn't work, and then move on. And so I think, Rick said, same with personality. I think we've learned that most personality tests are just garbage. So again, we're stuck with this legacy of a cult of traditional instructional designers who are pushing their stuff on us. And again, we all have to focus on the learning problem. And so if the learning problem is project management, any conversation about learning styles is not going to help us figure out, how to teach a good course on project management. Instead, we have to get past all that and say, let's look at it.
I was
I have a slight opinion there.
I thought you would. I see a few questions in the chat. I'll get back to you guys in a sec, but I wanted to also ask this. I really don't know the answer. It's the question that I was asked last week. I was talking to a client and I asked, like, are there any shortcomings to BranchTrack? Like, if you wanted something like fixed or edit, what would you do? And she said, like, I don't have a problem with BranchTrack. I have a problem before BranchTrack. I always struggle. Well, how do I start that? Because like leadership, yes, you can create like a scenario. You can ask leadership SMEs for cases, like what would Steve Jobs do? What would Henry Ford do in that or this situation? But if it's a complex topic, how can you dissect it? What do you do to sort of digest it into a scenario in the end? Because scenarios are shorter, simpler, but sometimes topics are complex, and sometimes or oftentimes SMEs are of no help. So I couldn't find an answer. I said I don't have a good answer, but I will talk to Clark and I'll ask.
So, I mean, any complicated topic can be broken down. Any complicated topic that you're expecting people to learn can be broken down. And, if you can't break it down, then almost you can't, then is, now you're just inspiring people. I can read a novel and I can shadow in a CEO's footsteps for a year, which I've done both. I have read a novel, and I have shadowed CEOs for years. And it's so complicated and so overwhelming. And so yes, I mean, if you want to have a mentorship relationship, or if you want to have an apprenticeship model, those are all great models, and we want to get there. So, a short sim doesn't replace that. But in almost any complicated topic, you can break down. You can peel off pieces of it, and part of the whole short sim design process is saying what pieces can we peel off and present early on in the process. So let's say I need to learn how to fly an airplane. Okay, presumably a pretty complicated topic. I could do, 20 or 30 or 40 short sims before I get into the cockpit, before I even get into a simple cockpit, to learn some basics of aerodynamics, how it works, to learn some basics of the controls. So I can peel off a lot more than I think of early topics, especially around scaffolding issues. So, if you are being a pilot, if you are being a CEO of a corporation, I mean, let's pick infinitely complicated topics. We can start peeling off things, and peeling off things doesn't necessarily just mean tactical stuff. So, if I can teach you how to be a CEO, I might do an 8-minute short sim on the important on ROI. Not, so as a CEO, you're worried a lot about ROI. I can do a 10-minute short sim on sourcing. Why is sourcing so important? Why is outsourcing or insourcing or whatever? What are the trade-offs inherently? So I can peel off content and present it simply. And then at some point, maybe I can't, in which case I can say, okay, you've now done 15 short sims. Now it's time for you to be an apprentice, or now it's time for you to be a CEO of your own small lemonade stand, or be a CEO of your own small company, or social media company or whatever. But I can peel off as much as I can. So part of the short sim design process is how do I not try to do everything at once, but be happy with the next short sim. It's almost like Econ 101 with the marginal utility of the next item. So if I eat one slice of pizza, then what's the value of the second piece of pizza? With a short sim design, it's sort of do the most pressing thing first, and then do the second most pressing thing, and then the third most pressing thing, and see how far you can go. Most people have 20 or 30 great short sims in them before they're done with their current stack of to-dos. So I think I think that's how I would do it. The other thing, though, is you do have to know what you're talking about. And so linear content is great for BSing. I can write a story and say, I was a CEO and it was a hard day and I made a lot of tough decisions. And boy, I really was a great leader. And I went home and wow, that was a great day. You can BS in linear content out the wazoo. It's incredibly easy to smooth over things, do a lot of hand waving, basically a lot of yada, yada, yadas. Woke up in the morning, yada, 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 had a good shareholder meeting, yada, 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 drove home. you can do that in linear content very convincingly. ChatGPT is a great BSer. And we're all ChatGPT inside of ourselves. So saying we can pretend that we know what we're talking about a lot more than we actually do. Simulation design does force a rigor. I mean, so again, let's just say delegating authority on leadership, whatever. You really have to understand what delegating authority means. What are the trade-offs? Why don't we do delegating authority very well, again, in the real world? What does it mean? And so in creating a simple scenario around delegating authority, you really do have to know your stuff. And so short sims are really bad if you don't know your topic very well, because, so one of the worst practices in short sim design is to start building a sim before you understand it. So, you do have to just obsess on a topic, understand the nuances of it. What are the underlying variables? What are the things? If you're scoring this, how do you score it? How do you score a day, a CEO's day? How do you score, what are the key decisions a CEO makes, and what are the trade-offs involved in those decisions? So, but a bunch of answers there, not any one that's probably satisfying, but hopefully a little portfolio of answers.
No, it totally makes sense. Also occurred to me that that there was this saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I think you don't have to force sims into everything every time, because if you feel that something doesn't lend itself to becoming a sim, especially a short simulation, then just don't, right? Sometimes it's better to go kind of like a more traditional, less effective way than to try and create something like super rich and effective and so on, and then fail at that. So
if you know your topic well, then if you know your topic well and you really care about the transfer of behaviors, you should use a short sim. And if you don't know your topic well and you don't care about the transfer, then shut up. then I don't want to I don't want to go through your workbook. So, so I agree with you. Again, you have to know your topic well. You have to care about the transferability of content. So those are the two things that you need for BranchTrack short sim to work. And if you don't have those, then nothing's going to work, but you can bluff it more easily.
So there's a question in chat: can I embed Unity created short scenarios or Beyond videos in BranchTrack? The answer is yes, you can embed Beyond videos in BranchTrack or any videos. And when it comes to Unity, there's two ways. Either you can publish it to HTML and then use BranchTrack classes platform, where you put some things that are built not in BranchTrack and some things that are built in BranchTrack, or you can actually wrap all of that into storyline, for example, right? Where on one page you have a Unity sim, and then another one you have a BranchTrack, and you can have even some data exchange between that and so on. But basically, BranchTrack is designed to be very kind of hands-on, simple, easy, super short learning curve, and so on. So we tend to stay away from overcomplicating things, or we do give you the tools, but they are a little bit on the programming side, right? BranchTrack is primarily designed for people with I don't know what's the politically correct term, very basic tech skills, and lets them focus on content rather than building this very, very media rich things.
I mean, I think of it in terms of non-exotic skills. And so every time we get excited about a new kind of technology, being virtual reality or being a ChatGPT or other kinds of language model, large language model things, which again, the training industry gets obsessed with seemingly every about 2 years. It's always involving skills that we don't really have access to, or that are phenomenally expensive. Even when the metaverse was a thing, the skills to create a good metaverse thing was phenomenally expensive. And so I think the notion of non-exotic skills that we have, in current environments is incredibly important. So short sims are really, really good because they're around experiential learning, which tends to work and people like it more, and they're a lot less frustrating and miserable than linear content. But they're also designed for the real world of budgets, the real world of timeframes. We talked about video. Another part of the real world is once you're done with your learning experience, you're going to have your sponsors tell you where you're wrong and tell you that you're wrong and want you to change it. You're going to put it out to communities and they're going to say it's too complicated or that something is unclear. You're going to have auditors who are going to say, I need to, before this gets out my front door, I need to audit this. And by the way, you can't use these words or you can't use these terms or something. So the real magic of BranchTrack and the real magic of the short sim design process, unlike say video, is that you can turn on a dime and change things on a dime. And because the reality is things change all the time, even if you can create a short sim in 2 weeks, which is your goal, things change. And so the fluidity of change, we're so good with words. We're so good. Someone comes to any of us on this call, someone comes in and says, let's not use this word. Let's use this word instead. We're going to focus on inclusiveness, not diversity. We're going to, instead of calling it leadership, we're going to call it, employee empowerment, whatever. You get that all the time. The address has changed. Part of the magic of any kind of enduring media is our ability to go in and make that change and get it back to the sponsor, in hours, 2 hours time. You have to be able to turn around changes in order not to kill yourself. So you can't do that in video. You can't do that in audio.
I think that why beyond keeps popping up in questions like this. A lot of people don't just say why. Well, can you embed videos? They say, can you embed beyond videos? And why people love Beyond? It's a great company. It used to be called Go Animate. It allows you to generate videos based on like characters and so on. So if you need to change, I don't know, like part of the video, you can do that easily. You don't have to reshoot it with real life actors and so on. But generally, like even from year to year, things will change, and the simpler they are, the easier it is to like replace a word, the better. This is why even in like traditional learning styles, I always oppose voiceover, for example, because like no one really listens to voiceover. Accessibility, people who need it for accessibility, they have other tools, and normal voiceover doesn't really help them, and it just eats up budgets which can be spent better.
And that budget part is really, really important. And that time thing is really, really important. Another thing, just again, in this concept of, why are our sims so hard? One reason why sims are so hard is most of us are very, very good, again, I keep saying so again, at words, but very bad at visuals. And we need to develop a way of creating visuals that's as fluid and dynamic, not high quality, not, we don't have to be Rembrandt or we don't have to, we don't have to draw Picasso. We don't have to be spectacularly good, but we do have to get good at nudging and moving around graphics and saying, oh, this person needs red hair instead of blue, or this dial needs to be a bit smaller, a bit bigger, or this room, we need an establishing shot here. We need to show the outside of the building before we show the inside of the building, whatever. We have to be as good with visuals as we are with words. And that's, again, because we're speaking a visual language, a language of action, as much as even more than we are of data dumps of text.
True. That actually, I think we've even covered this next question of mine, and I like how people in the chat are contributing your experience.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes,
you're wonderful.
Yeah. So visual context. I think visual context matters, right? So there's a fine line. The balance depends on your specific skills and the topics. I think some topics can deal with less visuals, some topics with more, but overcomplicating stuff and trying to do something that we don't have skills for. And I think metaverse is a very good example. For me, that was AR, right? When everyone was like raving about augmented reality, and they started to like looking what can you do with it, and so on. Like everything's like really hard, and and then before I had the chance to learn it and invest in it, the AR was gone into like certain niches where it's used. So if you remember Gartner hype curve, right? So you should never adopt anything when it's on top of hype. And I think
I was the first person, by the way, ever to create a Gartner hype cycle on e-learning. So I want to take a little bow though. So I created the original Gartner e-learning hype cycle.
All right. Okay.
In 1999. So anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Not important, but I'll take a bow.
Yeah. There's questions. We mentioned human rights in the chat. So my question is actually about ethics. Can I find the ethics? Yes. So this one. So are there ethical considerations to designing sims? I know that I've run into a customer who said, well, we cannot scare people into doing anything, like, and we're talking about safety. And I was like, well, my favorite method of teaching safety is scaring people into being safe. And they said, no, we can't do that. Like, we won't do that. We have to find other ways to change people's behavior, but we cannot just show them those terrible imagery that you offered, because this is what happens if you are not careful with machine covers and stuff like that. Do you have experience like that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a ton of experience. I did a robbery sim, and frankly, they went to a simulation because the linear stuff was actually too scary and too graphic and too disturbing. Anything can be scary or not, and you can have a again, if you're doing a robbery simulation, which I did about a year ago, there's it's going to be a robbery. There's going to be a person with a gun pointing at you, and that person's going to say, "Give me money or I'll shoot you." And again, you can make that a little more abstract. You can make it a little more, I don't say cartoony, I hate cartoony, but a little more isometric computer gamey or something, to show the message of sort of saying, if you do not, and in this case, if you do not survey the parking lot when you open up the bank in the morning, there could be someone waiting for you, hiding in the bushes and coming and pointing a gun at your head. And you can make that scenario very effective, very sobering, very like OMG, if you go through my robbery sim, you really don't want a robbery to happen. You really want to say, I'm going to do a lot of things to make a robbery not happen. But it's not terrifying. It's not scary. It's not, you're not being maudlin. You're not being vulgar in terms of doing this. You can do it very, very, you can do it very crisply. Let me go off on a bit of a tangent here, because I think there is a moral implication to short sims. And I think there's a moral implication to BranchTrack in this regard, which I think is often underappreciated, which is education, higher education especially, is losing a lot of people, and education in general. People go into instructional design tend to love education and love reading books and love learning about new things, and I think that's almost too bad, because I spend a lot more time with people who hate schools and hate learning, and who still need to become relevant, productive people in society. And I think the moral mandate of short sims, the moral mandate of creating kind of experiential content, is frankly to help schools reach more people. I mean, we have a situation where right now a lot more females than males are graduating from college. There is a language that some people speak, and it's not textbook. It's not sitting in lectures is horrible. Sitting in lectures for most people is really, really painful. And the first lecture is not so bad, a la hopefully this call, but the second lecture would be. And what if you had 4 more, of these calls after this one? Some people do, and it's awful. And so there is a moral component to saying we need to fundamentally create an alternative to lectures and workbooks to reach huge numbers of people, whether it's in our corporation or whether in our government, or whether it's you want inclusive, you want to be thinking about inclusive learning. It's not helping a blind person get your course, which, by the way, great, and BranchTrack's great at that too, by the way. BranchTrack is better than any other simulation designer by far in terms of creating inclusive content for that meets the needs of blind people and people with motor coordination problems. So good job. But the much bigger opportunity that we miss is all these people who don't speak the language of textbooks, who don't speak the language of lectures, who are incredibly powerful people. And it goes back to, how would you teach leadership? How would you teach leadership? If you're teaching a case study about, here's this famous person in 1820 who did something great, that's not going to help a lot of people. They want to do stuff. And again, computer game market understands this. People want to do things. So I think is an incredible moral component, ethical component, to greatly expanding the number of people for whom formal learning touches and impacts their life. And the way we're going to do that is by creating a lot more short sims. I mean, my goal is 10,000 short sims created, obviously not by me, within 3 or 4 years. My goal is 5 years from now for there to be 10,000 short sims out there, which is why I put out this workshop, because we need to change what it means to be smart, and we need to change what it means to capture intelligence into this skill model, not this facts model. So again, I think there's a much higher moral obligation to go down this path, even than these other sort of issues, which is also true, but not nearly as important.
Type a plus in the chat if you also have a call directly after this one, because I do. But yeah, well, speaking of vision impaired people and so on, at BranchTrack we try to keep up with as much of WCAG 2.1, I think, at this point, as possible, to accommodate screen readers, keyboard navigation, and so on. Well, partly because we want to, partly because we work with a lot of government agencies who require us to. The BranchTrack itself, given all this like complex nature of the editing tool, does not support all of the accessibility features, but we try to, but the output is 100% accessible. Right. So in terms of you mentioned gaming, but you also talked about gaming in the very beginning, that it's a bad role model. So I actually had this question prepared. So what do you think? Playing video games helps become a better instructional designer, well, especially when it comes to designing short sims, or not?
Absolutely. As long as you don't worry about it too much, as long as you don't try to, as long as you only use it for broad inspiration. I mean, I still believe Half-Life 2 and Portal are still, even now, the best learning. If you want to study learning, study Half-Life 2 and Portal in terms of such an unbelievably beautiful implementation of a little bit of knowledge about the skill you need to do, a little bit of practice, and then harder practice, and then improvising with the practice, and then combining 3 or 4 skills and stuff. So those are master classes in I mean, those beat anything I'll ever do. In terms of, wow, here is how we do it right. We can't afford it. We don't have the flexibility. Yeah, absolutely. And it is, I think, it is fun. I often play computer games after I'm taking a break from sim design to sort of refresh myself. I think there's a pacing, there's an energy, there's even lessons learned in terms of, how does the graphic interface work? How do the visuals work? What information is it presenting with you? I mean, I think one of the huge things that a good short sim has is sort of visual scaffolding in terms of, here's this complicated situation, here's where you are in the process, and oh, look, you're building something over time. By the time you're done with a 7-minute sim, you've actually built out this complicated graphical scaffolding understanding of this concept. So I think computer games are absolutely marvelous, and I play them before and after I do sim design, sort of to get me in the right mood, and also just it's fun to see things done that I didn't have to build to do it. So I think in a lot of ways it's much better than reading or even listening to lectures.
There's one thing that I definitely learned from you, Clark, in building sims, is to actually create this ramp of interface, because to me it was like person who like programmed or partly designed at least BranchTrack, it was like obvious that, okay, this is what the person is saying, these are the 3 options or 5 options that you can click, and it's obvious what you need to do and so on. But it's not for a lot of people. So now everything that we do, and the way we teach people to build it, is that on the first scene always start with just one option, no options. Just let people try finding that option corner and clicking on it. Like, it worked, something changed on screen. All right, now we learned something. Now you can give them 2 options, but those options should be the same essentially, and they lead to the same place. Now we know that options exist and we can choose them, but we don't need to really sweat too much about which one do I choose at this point in time. And then you just ramp up this difficulty, even though BranchTrack is so accessible, but still you can still build a couple of steps to that.
Well, so let's go even one step further, which is saying I can have a very complicated BranchTrack sim. I can say you're going to be managing a group of 7 people, and each person's going to have an unhappy or a happy dial. Each person's going to have a whatever dial. You're going to be making decisions in terms of how much time you're going to engage them when they're online. So you can have this incredibly complicated scenario in BranchTrack, brilliantly, by the way, but it's going to take you about 5 slides to ramp up to it. And so, you're going to build it. So, here's a person. Okay, here's one person that you have, and this person's working remotely. And then you have 5 other co-workers. These all co-workers are all working in a different continent. And then you have one more person who's working in your office. And now, each person, here's one person, and they want to take a day off or something, blah, blah, blah. And so you can build very, very neatly in 5 slides, in 6 slides, in 3 slides. I can take people to a very complicated place where they're now totally comfortable. They don't ever feel like they're learning anything, but they're now totally comfortable with this, fairly contrived, bizarre scenario of given to them, but they know how to navigate instantly. So one of the other brilliant things about BranchTrack is you don't have this learn how to learn part of the program. You have to make it all very natural, where someone doesn't go through a training session, which again, old-fashioned simulations, you might have 3 or 4 training sessions before you even started. We can do that effortlessly by making our sims simple, a la BranchTrack, but also ramping up. And again, that's what in the workshop, the last class is on when you have these complicated models, how do you ramp up to give people the skills they need without even knowing it? I mean, an essence of the short sim philosophy is it's just you pick it up and you're not even aware that you're learning. I mean, it's just it goes down so smoothly, like the real world. We speak loudly and someone rolls their eye and walks away. We've learned something. Okay, I'm not going to speak loudly to this group or something. So it's sort of this effortless learning that's hard. I mean, the worst thing about being a good short sim designer is the more successful you are, the more people who take your sims take it for granted, because it just seems so natural. It's like, well, of course that's how you learn this thing. I can't believe it took you any work, Clark, to come up with it, kind of thing. So that's the cruel part, but that's exactly the ramping up part of it, which again, Half-Life 2 and Portal both did just master classes in how do you ramp up skilling effortlessly for the player.
Or you can play Doom after a particularly frustrating day at work.
Always.
Now we have like exactly 5 minutes before I promise that we'll wrap this up, and therefore I'm going to ask my biggest question actually. But let's see if we can do that. So, when it comes to scenarios, how do you measure effectiveness? Are there like any specific metrics you want to look at? We all know about Kirkpatrick. We all know about return on learning investment and smiley sheets and so on. But is there anything in particular that we need to know when it comes to scenarios?
I think all of these metrics are not really what corporations are looking for. I mean, I've had superb results that have not resulted in future sales, and I've had no results that have resulted in very long contracts. I think we over obsess on metrics because, I mean, most metrics that we have are like, the box of shredded wheat, where the box says extra healthy and this will clean out your colon like you wouldn't believe, and 100% organic. Most of our metrics we use to compensate for the fact that people look at what we're producing and don't like it. And I think it changes when you're producing content that feels like, oh yeah, that feels right. You do a short sim on whatever topic it is, and someone and a sponsor plays through it and goes, yeah, this covers what I want you to cover. This hits all the negatives. If you're asking subject matter experts, where do people make mistakes? If you identify the mistakes that people make in the real world, and your short sims deal with those mistakes as part of the process, for example, you're creating relevant content. People know. I mean, the reason we have these infinite number of metrics is because I can show someone a workbook with 15 pages of bullet points, and my eyes glaze over, and the sponsor's eyes glaze over, and they say, "No, I can prove it works. I can prove 100% it works." And so most of these metrics are frankly overcompensating for crappy content that people hate, and so no other industry has this level of prove to me it works, because frankly it doesn't feel like it does. You play through a short sim and it feels right. It feels like you're covering. Yep, you hit the content I want you to do. You've hit the common mistakes. You're doing it. So it's amazing when sponsors are given short sims how happy they are with this is simply how this is how it works, as opposed to us dancing around saying we can prove it works. Every methodology that works on traditional workbook style content will still work on a short sim. So if you really love your metrics, if you really love your do it, and you'll get better results on short sims. Whatever your culture is. But I don't buy into this philosophy that metrics have led us down the right path. Metrics are why we have such great content, because we don't. I mean, so metrics are part of this linear thinking extension where it's become, all metrics are marketing. I mean, I know it. Every time we are using metrics, it is to market ourselves or our past products or something. And frankly, most of the time we're marketing it because people didn't like it. People didn't like the workbook, but we can prove that it works. So there's a little bit of whistling past the graveyard in the marketing strategy known as metrics.
Well, that's an excellent answer. Thank you so much. I guess this will be it for today. I enjoyed this immensely. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining and being so active in the chat. I really hope that we'll be able to meet again in a similar format at some point. I will just remind you that you can register at BranchTrack.com to get a free license for unlimited period of time, unlimited features. You're just limited in the number of projects that you can build. And go to either shortsims.com for all content that Clark Aldrich produces and the workshop on creating scenarios, or look in your emails for a link to a discounted version of that workshop that is only available to our subscribers. You don't have to be a client, you just have to be in the loop. If you're not, let me know, we'll loop you in. Right, so thank you so much. Thanks everyone, and have a great day. Those people who have a next call in 1 minute, good luck.
Bye-bye now. Thank you everyone. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.